Introduction. Imagine being a sophomore quarterback. You've worked for 2 years, waited your turn, and then a superstar transfers in, lured by an NIL deal that dwarfs your family's annual income. Last fall alone, more than 2,600 players entered the transfer portal, about 1 in 4 scholarship athletes. For some, it's a life-changing opportunity. For others, like you, it feels like the rug's been pulled out. And not everyone who enters even finds a new team. Many risk losing both their spot and their scholarship. The portal brings freedom, but it also reshapes loyalty. So is this brotherhood or just business? Why are so many players willing to walk away from the programs they once called home? The question behind brotherhood or business gets real when you look at the numbers. Roughly 1 in 4 scholarship football players now enter the transfer portal each year. In 2023 alone, about 2,611 players, or around 23% of FBS scholarship athletes, entered during the fall window. Those aren't small numbers. They're reshaping what it means to play, to stay, and to belong. On paper, it sounds great. The portal opens doors for players who might otherwise sit on the bench forever. A third stringer at Georgia could become a starter at Houston. A backup at Alabama could transform into the face of a program at Kansas. For these athletes, the portal is a second chance, a restart button that keeps their football careers alive. It promises hope to players who felt overlooked. But freedom has another side. When nearly a quarter of teammates leave in a given year, the locker room doesn't just change, it feels less steady, less permanent. Imagine spending years grinding with the same guys, only to watch a significant chunk of them cycle out each season. The chemistry that once defined college ball feels fragile. Brotherhood, once tied to sticking it out together, now feels conditional. A teammate on your left today might be lined up against you tomorrow. Consider a mid-tier program that loses its team captain, not because he doubts his teammates, but because another school offered a stronger NIL package. That's not an exaggeration. It happens. Leadership, once the anchor that defined a team's culture, becomes harder to replace when loyalty bows to opportunity. Coaches no longer rebuild teams in measured steps. Many admit that roster building now feels like an annual reset. Some even describe the current environment as plug and play, where adding and losing transfers every year makes it difficult to sustain any long-term culture. The cost isn't just talent, it's trust. Think of it this way. What does family mean when the family table seats new faces every season? If a quarter of the people at dinner are replaced year after year, does that table still carry the same meaning? On the field, tradition and continuity used to define a team's identity. Now, that identity shifts with every transfer announcement. Fans who used to rally behind their guys struggle to keep up. Today's player feels temporary, as if he belongs to this program until a better deal comes along. When you hold this against the values found in Scripture, the contrast becomes sharp. The Bible highlights covenant, faithfulness, and the kind of promise-keeping that endures even when life gets tough. It treats loyalty as a principle, not a passing choice. None of this is meant to condemn athletes moving schools. Most are simply doing what the system pushes them to do. Yet when compared to biblical faithfulness, the modern system makes loyalty seem negotiable, reshaped into contracts and financial terms. No longer an enduring bond, it feels conditional and temporary. And here's the difficult question. Can loyalty really survive in this new world of incentives? A player may want to stay put, but when another school offers double his NIL value, how realistic is it for him not to leave? Fans may still cling to old visions of program loyalty, but loyalty struggles to compete with contracts larger than most players' families have ever seen. Tradition, pride, school colors, all get overshadowed by the pull of better deals elsewhere. What once felt like family now looks more like a marketplace. The transfer portal has built opportunity, but it has also torn at the emotional fabric of college football. It helps players chase their dreams, but it makes it harder for teams, coaches, and fans to preserve that deep sense of brotherhood. And once brotherhood starts to weaken, another force steps forward to take its place. a force far more powerful than tradition, loyalty, or even winning. It's the force of money, and when it dominates, the entire game begins to take a very different shape. What happens when contracts start shaping more decisions than team pride? That's the core of the when money defines the game moment we're living through. Name, image, and likeness rights, NIL, have flipped the entire equation in college football. For decades, athletes asked why the schools, networks, and sponsors made millions while they weren't allowed to earn a cent. Now that has changed. Players can finally use their own talent and brand to take care of their families, build futures, and no longer watch others profit off their hard work. For many, it feels like a correction that came years too late. But money changes the dynamic the moment it enters the room. When a player secures a deal worth six figures, or even comes in as a recruit expecting $500,000 before he's played a down, the tone inside the locker room isn't the same. Some programs are now budgeting eight figures annually just for NIL, and one even added a 10% talent fee to season ticket sales specifically to help fund athlete compensation. In short, the numbers are staggering, and they're reshaping how programs operate. Players no longer just choose schools for coaching, tradition, or academics. They weigh which booster groups and collectives have the deepest pockets. For athletes, it makes sense. For fans, it feels like the game is drifting away from its roots. That shift shows up in smaller symbols too. Think about what a jersey used to mean. The uniform was about school colors, history, and identity. Today, that same jersey can also symbolize the brands on an athlete's endorsement deal, a fast food chain, a car dealership, or a fashion sponsor. The uniform hasn't lost its glory, but it carries a new meaning. For some fans, that's exciting progress, a sign that players finally share in the rewards. For others, it feels like something sacred is now shared with the marketplace. The bigger question then becomes, how should money truly fit inside this sport? Scripture doesn't tell us that money itself is evil, but it points out the dangers of loving money more than anything else. It cautions us against letting wealth define us. At the same time, it speaks about stewardship, using what you've been given for good, managing blessings responsibly. NIL can sit at either end of that spectrum. One athlete may use his income to relieve his family's burdens, help his community, or wisely position himself for life beyond football. Another might chase after short term luxury, constantly measuring his worth against a teammate's contract. The opportunity itself isn't the problem, it's the way that opportunity is handled that makes the difference. This is where identity comes into play. Are young athletes being encouraged to build their foundation on contracts and sponsorships, or on character development and discipline that lasts beyond the field? One foundation burns out fast, the other shapes a life. When branding opportunities become louder than teamwork and grit, the old values of sacrifice and unity risk getting pushed aside. It's important to be clear, money is not the villain here. NIL addressed real inequities that needed fixing. Athletes deserve the chance to benefit from their own excellence. The system, however, now rewards financial opportunity above almost everything else. The result is a game that looks less like a family gathering around a shared goal and more like an industry with annual transactions. Fans may cheer for the uniforms, but underneath, they wonder if they're supporting a program or a temporary roster assembled through a bidding process. And that's where the deeper concern surfaces. If money is already shifting how players see their schools and how teammates see each other, what happens behind the scenes when those same financial pressures drive decisions long before a player even enters the portal? That's where the spotlight turns to the hidden side of recruiting, where rules blur and trust erodes, and where the strangest stories shaping today's game don't always appear on the highlight reel. The real question at this stage is what happens when recruiting doesn't stay confined to high school prospects. The ethics of recruiting in the shadows come into play the moment teams start circling around players who are already on college rosters. Officially, the NCAA says no school can contact an athlete until his name is in the transfer portal. The logic sounds fair. Protect the current team while letting the player explore freely once he makes his decision public. But reality looks different. Behind closed doors, coaches, agents, and even donors often initiate quiet conversations early. It's a shadow system. Offers of NIL packages and promises of a bigger stage often reach a player and his family long before he ever declares. Take the example of a sophomore wide receiver at a mid tier program. He has a breakout season, racks up yardage, and suddenly coaches he's never met begin letting interest slip through back channels. No official contact has happened, but he hears enough to know if he starts the portal process, a high value deal is waiting. His school spent years developing him, pouring in resources, coaching, and care. Then, one season later, that investment is stripped away by a bigger program with deeper pockets. Legally, by NCAA rules, that shouldn't happen. Practically, everybody knows it does. That's why words like tampering feel almost too soft. The general understanding inside the sport is that backdoor contact is widespread. General managers, recruiters, and boosters get signals lined up weeks in advance. By the time a player officially enters the portal, conversations are already halfway finished. Some insiders even describe the early weeks of portal season as done deal time because most top players already know where they're headed. To complicate things further, decisions now fall into compressed time frames, with portal windows limited to just 20 days in December and 10 days in April. These short bursts mean schools cram months of recruiting into a matter of weeks. The pressure pushes conversations into the gray area well before the windows even open. By then, what's supposed to look like an open marketplace is more like a series of handshakes already agreed to in advance. None of this means there are no rules. On the books, the guidelines are clear, but enforcement is inconsistent, and punishments almost don't exist. When violations carry little consequence, the loudest voice belongs not to the rule but to the reward. That's where the Wild West label sticks. It's not lawless, but it feels like order without a sheriff. Teams bending the rules aren't reckless, they're rational. If tampering offers the easiest path to winning rosters and nobody pays the price, why wouldn't programs keep using it? For smaller schools, the fallout is devastating. These programs often rely on overlooked players, developed patiently over years. Now, any rising star can be pulled away in an instant. Coaches describe this as one step forward, two steps back recruiting. You invest time, sweat, and belief in a kid only to watch him leave the second a bigger check shows up. For fans, it feels like loyalty is punished rather than rewarded, and the identity of a team becomes thinner each season. Picture the process like an auction. A player stands in the spotlight while hidden bidders raise the stakes. The bids don't come in public, not yet, but when he officially enters the portal, the highest number is already waiting. That atmosphere replaces what once looked like a steady team culture. Instead of stories grounded in dedication and tradition, fans see turnover measured in contracts. The foundation shifts from family to transaction, and here lies the ethical question. If conversations start with whispered deals and hidden offers, what kind of message does that send? It's not just about breaking a rule book, it's about breaking trust. Scripture calls honesty and integrity essential, shaping communities through truth rather than manipulation. In this shadow system, the values preached on Saturdays don't always line up with the promises made behind closed doors. Without trusted standards and consistent accountability, tampering eats into the sport's foundation. What began as a shared effort now feels stripped down to business negotiation. Trust weakens, and so do the deeper bonds that once characterized college football. But tampering does more than drive talent around the country. It unsettles the inside of the locker room. When players move this often, the very culture teams depend on begins to fracture. That's where the next challenge emerges. What happens when stability, mentorship, and identity give way to a revolving door? Culture on a one-year lease has become the new reality for many teams. For decades, programs counted on a steady rhythm of development. Freshmen arrived wide-eyed, learned through trial and error, and looked up to juniors and seniors to understand what it meant to belong. By the time those freshmen matured into upperclassmen, they became the mentors, shaping the next generation. That cycle gave the game continuity, tradition, and leaders who carried the identity of a program. Today, that rhythm feels fractured. The transfer portal reshapes rosters so often that leadership can vanish overnight. A senior wide receiver you've leaned on as a role model might be gone before spring practice simply because another school offered something better. Mentorship that once matured over 3 or 4 years now shrinks into the span of a single season, sometimes just a few months. Coaches admit that instead of building culture stone by stone, they're often patching rosters together each year. One coach described it as plug and play, enough to field a team that competes but too unstable to grow the deeper traditions that sustain a program. That instability pushes strain onto locker rooms. Players notice the churn. Freshmen may hear about team culture, but when captains leave and rosters shuffle every offseason, that talk feels thinner than it used to. Coaches want long term leaders who model commitment through difficulty, yet leaders themselves are pulled away before those lessons take root. Trust and stability require time, and time is what the transfer cycle constantly interrupts. The academic cost adds another weight. Research shows that athletes often lose 60–70% of their credits when transferring to a new school. One Georgia Tech safety considered walking away after finishing his sophomore season. But when he discovered his new option would honor only 60 credit hours, he realized he would be set back more than a year academically. That real calculation is one most fans rarely see. Pursuing a better football opportunity can undo months or years of classroom progress. And when credit loss stretches out graduation, it doesn't just affect long-term plans, it spills into daily life. If half your academic work no longer counts and you're scrambling to retake courses, your energy for practice or film sessions inevitably suffers. What was meant to be a step forward for football can turn into a heavy setback for life beyond the game. The mentorship gap grows wider here. Proverbs speaks of wisdom shaped through counsel, through time spent walking alongside those who've already endured trials. That type of wisdom cannot be downloaded instantly. It requires relationship built slowly. But when teammates cycle in and out so fast, the older voices aren't always around long enough to share lessons about patience, humility, or resilience. A freshman in 2024 may never spend 3 steady years under the wing of the same senior leader. Instead, he sees examples come and go, connections form and break, and the guidance feels thinner as a result. You can almost picture it like building a house where bricks are swapped out every year. A wall might stand, but the foundation is never fully solid. Programs want their culture based on trust, commitment, and loyalty, but if every offseason removes a quarter of the bricks, eventually the wall weakens. Even fans start to feel it. A sophomore quarterback who electrifies the stadium one year is gone the next, having transferred for a bigger deal. Instead of watching him mature into a leader, fans are forced to watch his story unfold somewhere else. The continuity that once tied communities to their teams gets fractured. Yes, high turnover can bring quick wins. A coach can pull a handful of talented transfers and flip a program's record in one season. In the short term, results speak loudly. But the deeper traditions, players who sacrifice together over time, leaders who embody the history of their jersey, grow faint when rosters are rebuilt every year. Programs may still win games, but the shared story that made the game unique fades into something more transactional that leaves us staring at an uncomfortable reality. When the values of mentorship, stability, and long-term culture are reduced to temporary arrangements, the game risks losing more than players. It risks losing its sense of self. The effects reach beyond the field, echoing through classrooms, locker rooms, and fan bases. And if the foundation of culture can be leased only one season at a time, it raises an even bigger question. In a sport that once prided itself on tradition and belonging, what happens when profit and opportunity grow louder than loyalty and memory? Has the soul of college football been sold? That's the question hanging over the sport today. For generations, fans saw college football as more than just a game. It was a world where loyalty outshined contracts, where rivalries grew out of shared tradition, and where the connection between players, schools, and communities felt unshakable. Now, with NIL and the transfer portal dominating the conversation, the lines between amateur and professional have blurred so much that many wonder if they're watching the same sport at all. Is it still the game they knew, or has it become something entirely different? On the field, the action is as thrilling as ever. Saturdays still bring the drama of last minute touchdowns, stadiums shaking in unison, and moments that stick with fans for a lifetime. The plays haven't lost their magic. But off the field, unease permeates conversations. Fans talk about loyalty slipping away, about players treating programs like stepping stones, and about rosters turning over so quickly that coaches see years of work unravel in a single offseason. What used to feel like family now feels more and more like free agency. The very qualities that once distinguished college football, the tradition, the continuity, the sense of belonging, now seem vulnerable, even replaceable. From a business perspective, the picture looks different. Media and broadcast deals remain enormous, signaling how valuable the sport remains as entertainment. The Big Ten, for example, recently signed a television contract worth an estimated $7 billion over 7 years, and overall NCAA revenues have climbed past $1 billion annually. On paper, the game has never been healthier. Yet despite the revenue, many longtime fans wonder if financial growth has come at a hidden cost. They look past the dollar signs and sense that the soul of their team, the part rooted in community and shared identity, is slipping away. You can pack arenas every weekend, but that doesn't calm the feeling that money is redrawing the sport from the inside out. Here's where the question sharpens even further. Jesus taught that you cannot serve both God and money, not because money is evil, but because when wealth becomes the primary measure of value, it competes with deeper priorities. Applied here, the warning is clear. If college football defines itself mostly by contracts and payouts, it risks losing the balance that once kept it grounded. Donors and deals may fund the game, but they should never become the heartbeat of it. The real test isn't whether NIL and media money exist, it's whether they lead the mission or serve it. To be fair, it's not all loss. NIL has opened doors that were locked for decades. For many athletes, it provides life-changing opportunities. A kid from a tough background can finally support his family while still in school. A player who may never set foot in the NFL can still graduate with financial stability, business connections, and new possibilities for his future. These are tangible, welcomed changes. They represent justice for athletes who, for years, saw others profit while they risked injury and poured their youth into the game. In that sense, NIL has restored some fairness. But alongside these gains is the reality of shifting fan expectations. Supporters who once celebrated seeing players stay 4 years now wrestle with jerseys that represent athletes only briefly. The relationship between fan and player, once marked by continuity, often feels transactional. Even people who understand the benefits for athletes feel an ache when tradition gets pushed aside. This duality, hope, and frustration side by side, creates the tension at the center of the sport today. So, has the soul been sold? That depends on where the game goes from here. If NIL and the portal remain tools, a way to support athletes, empower families, and strengthen programs, then the heart of the sport can still be preserved. But if success gets measured only in financial terms, then the pull away from tradition and community will keep accelerating. At its best, college football has always been more than wins and stats. It has been about identity, discipline, and a sense of belonging larger than any single player. That identity doesn't have to vanish, but it does need deliberate choices to protect it. This is why the current moment carries weight. The soul of the game doesn't disappear overnight. It shifts slowly, piece by piece, depending on where athletes, programs, and fans set their priorities. If the focus becomes fairness, development, and integrity, then the game's spirit can endure even in a modern financial age. But if unchecked profit dominates the story, the connection between players and communities will keep unraveling. And that leads us to an even more pressing reflection. When money and freedom collide with tradition, the real question isn't whether they end the game, it's whether we still choose to anchor it in values that last. In the end, The future of college football depends less on rules or money and more on what values guide everyone involved. Empowering athletes doesn't have to erase tradition, and opportunity doesn't have to replace loyalty. Integrity, fairness, mentorship, and stewardship can still shape how the game is played and remembered. So here's the reflection. How should Christians approach NIL and the transfer portal? What values do you want your teams to model? Character, community, accountability. Share your thoughts below. When empowerment and tradition walk together under wisdom, the heart of the game still has room to thrive. Stay blessed by the best, friends.